My name is Ryan, and I am the online practice leader at Empower. And we're going to be talking a bit about some verification work we're doing with Adometry and a financial industry client of ours. But before we dive into some details around ad verification, I want to just take a couple minutes to talk about why verification matters more so today than ever before. And then if Dina, you could advance that slide for me or pass control. I think you're still in control there.
Okay, I thought I passed it to you. Yeah, it says that you are, but I can go ahead and advance it for you. Maybe. There we go.
Okay, great. So as one of the nation's largest independent media agencies, we at Empower handle a lot of digital activity for a lot of clients. And in fact, just to kind of quantify this for all of you, because I know you're quantified people, on behalf of the clients that we work with, we served over 7 billion impressions last year, the equivalent of reaching everyone on the earth with at least one digital media ad. So over the course of that year and all of those billions of impressions, we directly identified, RFP'd, planned, purchased, and stewarded media buys with over 200 publishers and ad networks. So that's obviously a lot of work as we think about why verification that goes into making sure all of those sites are safe, have the correct environments for us, and all the networks have site lists that are safe and have the correct environments for us. So that is on the publisher or network direct side. But as we then advance and think about the programmatic buying side, we also do a lot of programmatic buying at Empower, using our data management and buying platforms to find and serve ads to audiences through real-time bidding, or RTB buying. So looking at just 1/4 of activity for one RTB client, we served impressions on over 12,000 sites on a single buy. So thinking about it from a publisher direct or network direct versus a programmatic buying standpoint, you can see that it's literally impossible to keep up with verification on a programmatic buy, whereas it's hard enough on a publisher direct buy. So going down the path a little bit further on programmatic buying and why we're going to need to care more tomorrow even than we do today, programmatic buying isn't slowing down. We know that it's speeding up. Inventory purchased via RTB buying doubled from 2010 to 2011 and continues through this year to grow at accelerated rates. We know it's important because some of the world's largest advertisers, like Procter & Gamble, right here in our backyard in Cincinnati, Ohio, and Kellogg have recognized that RTB is the way of the future and have taken some of programmatic buying functionality in-house at their corporations. And we believe at Empower that this could be, and perhaps is, the natural evolution for all media. And it isn't just the natural evolution for all media because we want it to be as an agency, or we want it to be as advertisers, seeing the results are so much more impactful when we do it this way versus the traditional way. But it's also the natural evolution on the supply side. So because we're talking to a swath of financial industry employees, we wanted to break it down for you in financial industry terms. So thinking about revenue per employee, I just want to demonstrate a little bit why we think that RTB is a supply side revolution. So let's just start here with Google, Facebook, and Yahoo. So Google and Facebook have really, really lean sales teams, and they rely mostly on technology and their interface for the bulk of their purchases. Now, when you contrast that to Yahoo, they also obviously have some technology with their Yahoo search platform and with their Right Media Exchange, but they do have a really robust sales force because they grew up as a portal, not as an interface. So you can see how the difference plays out by looking at revenue per employee for a Yahoo with their robust sales force versus a Google or a Facebook with their much, much leaner sales forces. So you can see and imagine that Yahoo obviously is probably envious of the revenue per employee position that Google and Facebook have in the marketplace. And then as we extend this argument beyond just these three and look at traditional media as a whole, you can see that broadcast companies, cable companies, print companies, and even ad networks like ValueClick, which literally were built on the ability of large sales teams to forge relationships with publishers to A, secure inventory, and B, secure relationships with advertisers and agencies to sell it, they all can be envious of the efficiency numbers of the likes of Google and Facebook. So there is literally a corporate incentive for traditional and digital media companies to move to a more high technology focus with programmatic buying and programmatic selling, which is why we believe it's the future of the industry. So in a world today where direct purchase inventory is tough enough to manage, as we talked about, and exchange purchase inventory is nearly impossible, let's just go through a couple key reasons why brands should care about trying to keep up with all of that inventory. And the main reason is that the unmanaged digital world can be a very, very scary place to live. So thinking about a recent Comscore study that looked at 12 national brands and over 1.8 billion impressions, we looked at the types of environments in which those ads were served, and we found some pretty startling statistics. So the first statistic here is that, on average, 31% of the impressions served across this study were served out of view, which means that over 500 million impressions from the 1.8 billion impression study were never seen. They were paid for by the advertisers, but they were never seen by the consumer that they intended to reach. So that's a pretty alarming stat in and of itself. The next stat, depicted here by this little globe, speaks a little bit to audience. So another thing that we learned from this study is that overall we have about a 70% hit rate on matching our message to our intended audience, which isn't bad. And even with the 30% miss rate for intended audience, at least we're reaching people that could make the decision to go to our brand or to buy our services, even if they weren't the intended target in the first place. But the more compelling piece of this picture to me is the geography piece of this. Because if we're serving impressions to a user in a geography that's outside of our current footprint, then certainly they're not going to ever have the ability to purchase our services. And we've seen through this study that up to 4% of those impressions, of all impressions, are served out of geography. The next example is fraud. So as we think about fraud, for one of the campaigns in the study, up to 10% of the impressions delivered were delivered fraudulently. So they weren't just out of view, they weren't just out of audience or out of geography. They were literally fake impressions that were just built by bad intenders in the back of the digital world using black hat tactics that we probably don't want to get into, but can be a compelling thing to avoid. And then finally, brand safety. And this is really why we care the most about verification, and also why the client that we're talking with you guys about today cares the most about verification. So while the total percentage of impressions was relatively low, it was less than 1% of all impressions served in terms of brand safety, 72% of the campaigns analyzed had at least some impressions in brand unsafe environments, which means that these impressions for 72% of the campaigns were showing up in things like hate speech, in context related to violence, in context related to adult content or pornography, and so on and so forth. So that's certainly something that conservative brands, like financial brands tend to be, want to sit up and pay attention to when it comes to why verification. So then thinking a little bit more specifically about Adometry, at Empower we've been using verification on behalf of our clients for many, many years. But we've recently made the move to Adometry, and I just wanted to illuminate for those on the phone the reasons that we chose to make that move. So the first reason was better service. Service was lacking with our last partner to the point where it would take days to hear back from them. But we live in an everyday world, as I'm sure all of you do on the phone as well, so we can't wait that long to hear back on something as important as verification when we think about the wild, wild west that I just depicted in the previous slide. So Adometry's responsiveness was one of our key selling points, and we've certainly found that to be true through working with them for about 6 months. The second reason is they have a more flexible pricing model. So with our last partner, they looked at verification on a campaign-by-campaign basis. So for smaller campaigns, if you ever have smaller campaigns running, or for smaller advertisers, if you're not consistently hurdling over 50 million impressions per campaign, that can mean that they didn't run the requisite minimum impression count to turn on verification. And in today's world, as we know, that just isn't an option. So Adometry has pricing models that allow us to run verification for any client or any campaign regardless of the size, which is really, really important. And third, Adometry puts vital information at our fingertips. With robust dashboards that we can access, we can drill down to partner level details campaign by campaign to see exactly how our campaigns are performing in real time. And this just wasn't possible with our last partner, but it's a crucial part of the way we work with Adometry and the way we implement verification on our clients' behalf today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John to talk a little bit more about Adometry's verification process and product in particular.
Perfect. Thanks, Ryan. So yeah, my name is John Dietz. I think Dina introduced me. I'm the VP of Products here at Adometry. And you know, who doesn't like to start with a nice history lesson? So I just wanted to talk about ad verification a little bit before we get into a few more details. So you know, if you've been around the media space for a long time, you may be aware that ad verification started around late 2008, early 2009. And it was really addressing a big need about transparency. Ad networks were huge. There were about 500 ad networks around then. Most of them were blind. So what that means is if you were buying media back in, you know, it doesn't seem like that long ago, but, you know, 4 years ago, you might be buying a lot of things and you had no idea where they were showing up or really what was going on with that. You know, at most you're getting some reach numbers. And so ad verification was a big hit in that space. For the first time, advertisers and agencies could start to see what sites, when they were buying through a network, their ads were actually showing up on, and really got to see for the first time, you know, the fact that there was, you know, pornography and adult sites in there and hate speech and all those kind of things that, you know, you certainly don't want to get the call from the client, you know, at 7 a.m. saying, why is your ad on this site? And back then, we were starting then as well. You know, we would see campaigns with, you know, as much as, you know, 2 to 5% of all of their impressions were on sites that they didn't want to be on, that they would consider brand damaging. And 2 to 5% may not seem like a big number, but if you're buying 100 million ad impressions in a month, imagine what, you know, what that means when you say 5 million of those impressions are on sites you don't want to be on. So that was really the main driver of ad verification back in 2008. I would say in the last year to year and a half, visibility, so whether the ad was above the fold or below the fold, or whether it was ever viewed or not, has become a really big portion of ad verification. So ad verification companies have moved beyond kind of this brand safety aspect to ad visibility, again giving advertisers a lot more transparency into the kind of inventory they're buying. And really what we foresee happening this year and moving forward is really taking that ad verification beyond just transparency and saying, well, how can I use this information to build better campaigns for my clients? So one way you could look at it, and this is kind of how we look at it, is there's a kind of a maturing of ad verification companies. So you know, when you start off with kind of the first stage that we have there, which is just avoid that bad stuff. Don't get that call at 7 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock at night. You want to make sure that you're not on sites that are going to damage your brand. And once you've got that settled, you know, what next? So then we take ad verification and say, well, let's make sure we get what we paid for, that we're in the geos that we paid for. If we did geo targeting, if we did day parting, what are we getting in the right time of day? So there's kind of this you know, hierarchy that you move up the chain. As you solve one, you want to move to the other. So you've got brand safety solved. Now all your sellers are in compliance. The next thing you want to do is make sure that you're not wasting a lot of inventory. So even if I'm not doing targeting, am I in geos that are way outside my, you know, my service range, or times of day that I just didn't want, even though I didn't know I was getting? So again, this is about more transparency. Are there insights I can find in the data that I didn't even think about that may be causing me to waste a lot of impressions? So, you know, ad visibility comes into there big as well. I'm on sites that just aren't, where my ads just aren't being seen, but I'm still paying for those. And then as we solve all of those three, we move on to that next one, which we're really focused on right now is okay, now that we've gotten rid of the waste and the things that are out of compliance and the brand safety, can we do something to really help an advertiser improve their campaign? So can we find out what's really working well, again, that maybe is unexpected? And this is what we call our kind of our path to attribution. So to get a little bit more specific on these, what I did was you can kind of look at each stage and then several different types of functionality. So we talked about sites and categories. This is that transparency of, you know, what sites was I on, were they brand damaging? And then I can look at them across each of these stages. So from a brand safety standpoint, I want to make sure that I'm not on sites that are damaging to my brand. We send alerts, and we can work with publishers on making sure that that kind of thing doesn't happen. But the next step is compliance. Am I, if I had an approved whitelist, am I on all of the sites that I expected that I would be on? Right? You keep moving up the chain. Now I'm avoiding waste. Now, I may not have approved or disapproved of these sites, and they may not be negative, but they're just obvious misses. Maybe they're in a foreign language, and my users, aren't targeting that language, or, targeting a certain class of user that I just didn't expect. And then it's down to that next step, which is that path of attribution is, well, now how do I figure out, are there certain sites or categories of sites that perform really well for me, again, that I may not have expected? And you can kind of look at each of these function points, and I'm not going to go over all of them in detail, but I'll kind of go over them at a high level. The viewability, again, it's about page position. If I was sold above the fold content, did I get above the fold? But really, it moves on beyond that to, well, what sites was my add-on where they were most likely to be seen, or really be seen for more than 5 seconds or more than 10 seconds? I mean, these are the kinds of things that we can show, and I think everyone can understand that having an ad in view on a page for 15 seconds is going to be more valuable than having it on a page for 1 second. Audience is a big one too. So if I'm doing audience targeting, am I actually getting what I think I'm targeting? And then you can start to see, well, what audiences am I actually hitting? And then I can start to see, well, which of the audience types that I'm hitting are really performing well or not performing well. So, men or women, or I might look at income levels, or even intent-based. Really, it depends on what what segmentation system you're using. And then you can take those same kind of analyses and look at things like geography and day parting. And there's actually more. These are just some examples of how we're trying to move up the chain and say, well, it's not just about brand safety anymore. That's still very important, but we can do a lot more than that with the amount of transparency we have and driving that kind of down that chain to really building better ad campaigns. And so I've been trying to talk very generally about ad verification. When we look at our ad verification offering, the kinds of things that we really focused on in this offering are, a real-time monitoring with alerts, which means that as soon as that ad impression hits, it's in our reporting within about 5 minutes, and we can send alerts, and we can set those alerts to go to a publisher so that they can fix their problem. Full site disclosure. We don't just show the negative things. We show every site and categorize them into 50 categories so you can see what kinds of sites you're getting. So if you bought sports, but you're getting travel, then that's something you certainly want to know. Viewability data with timing. So again, that kind of goes back to that. Was it visible for 5 seconds? Was it visible for 30 seconds? It can make a real difference. On audience data, we have a lot of partnerships, so we can bring in that data. Targus, now called Newstar, Nielsen, Axiom, Datalogix, Xlate. So it's really about trying to look at those segments the same way that an advertiser might look at them. And the other thing that's really important for us is, we've built great relationships with publishers over the last 4 years because we really treat them all as partners, and we're trying to make the whole ecosystem better. And so, we've been approved on every single major publisher, and we typically don't have problems running our tags anywhere, and that's an important piece for us as well. So I guess I will kick it back to Ryan now.
Yeah, so thanks, John. I just wanted to show the audience a couple quick examples because I know this is, a largely financial audience of what some of the results can look like for our financial clients. So to start with at the top here, and most importantly to the client that we're working with, deployment of Adometry has greatly reduced the % of impressions served in unsafe environments for our brand. So within 2 weeks of starting a recent campaign that we had verification turned on through Adometry with, we decreased the incidence of a brand unsafe occurrence 6-fold. So within 2 weeks, we decreased it by 6-fold. So the way this works, as I mentioned the dashboards earlier, is that our team of digital planners and buyers can literally access this system anytime, any place, anywhere in real time and download problem site lists by inventory partner and then work with those inventory partners to remove those problem site lists from our inventory pool. So we see where impressions are firing in an alarming area or a brand unsafe area. We download that list, and then we work immediately and directly with a great sense of urgency with our media partners to make sure that those are removed from the plan. Another example here is the visibility report, which is the one at the bottom left of the screen, which you can also pull partner by partner, and then you can leverage that, as we've been doing, in stewarding and optimizing your buys for the current campaign, but also in negotiating for the next campaign. So if you were to say, listen, vendor A, 31% of the impressions that you're serving are below the fold, we're not interested in paying that high of a CPM, then this is a great piece for negotiating when you go back to use some leverage against them. And then the last image on this screen, because many banks are not advertising just nationally, they're also advertising in geo footprints around the U.S. So this is a state geography report. So there's a lot of details underneath of this geography report, which you can drill down to the DMA level with as well. But this is particularly important for clients with that sub-national campaign targeting to make sure your impressions are flowing to those geographies where consumers have access to actually purchase your brand. So this is just a couple quick examples from our financial client that we think could be beneficial to any financial client given the importance of verification in today's world. And then as we think about the final reason, John was kind of alluding to this, why we chose Adometry here on the next slide. The first was better service, which we talked about. The second was the pricing model being more conducive to larger or smaller campaigns or clients. The third was that dashboard of information at our fingertips that we can use and analyze in real time to make decisions and optimizations. And then the fourth one here is because they've got a really, really strong attribution offering. And we looked at several different attribution companies, and this is something that we used to do by hand at Empower, which was time-consuming and not very exacting. So this is certainly where we believe the industry is heading, and Adometry had the best solution to partner with the verification solution and a single-point solution, which I'll let John, if you want to talk about that.
Perfect. So hopefully we can get to, oh, there we go. So one of the things that I had talked about kind of in that maturing of verification is that moving from kind of that brand safety to the compliance really towards how do we build better campaigns. And that's where a lot of our focus is right now. So, everything else is important, but it's foundational in terms of once we have all this data, we want to make sure that we can do something really effective with it and build better campaigns. And so when we look at what we offer in terms of attribution, and the advantages of tying that to verification is we have a simple tag, right? If you've got verification, all we have to do is flip a switch and we can run attribution against it because it's all coming through the same system. We have complete data. So that means we can start to run attribution and measure effectiveness against things like site categories and viewability and geography and a bunch of things that you just can't get from something like a DSP or a DMP or an ad server log file. The other thing that we offer that's very specific to our offering is really data-driven attribution. So it's about looking, beyond compliance and beyond just, some rules-based systems. Let us tell you what the data says about what's working, and then model that and say, here's how we can find out what's the best way to increase your results based on the history of your data and all of these things we've been collecting through our verification system. And then really what that leads to is very actionable recommendations for how to improve campaigns. It's not just about data anymore. It's about making everything better. It's about optimization, which channels should I spend more money on, or which sites should I spend more money on, what should I drop, how should I frequency cap, how should I target. It's really about looking at all of that to build a better campaign. And so, obviously there's a lot more that we could go into from an attribution standpoint, but because this was primarily about verification, I wanted to just touch on that. If you want more information about attribution, obviously you should contact us. I'll kick it back to Dina and see if there's any questions.
Great. Thank you, John. If anybody has questions right now, please go ahead and type them into the question panel in the right on your little control panel for GoToWebinar. I'll just give you guys a second to do that. Okay, it looks like we have one. How long did it take to implement the Adometry platform? I don't know if Ryan, you want to, or John, which one of you wants to tackle this question?
Yeah, sure. So this is Ryan. Honestly, it was pretty simple at Empower. Once we identified that we wanted to move forward with Adometry and move away from our previous partner, we were able to make the switch pretty seamlessly. It was so easy that actually we just handed it off to one of our media specialists, and she pulled some numbers and some reports and passed those over to John and his team. So John, if you want to talk a little bit more about the technical implementation.
Yeah, I mean, it ends up being really easy, and again, I think this is the benefit of us being in this industry for several years. I mean, we've integrated with all of the major third-party ad servers, so if a client is using DFA or Atlas or MediaMind or really any of those, it becomes very simple to add our code into those platforms and pull data right from them. So it ends up, honestly, it takes not more than a day for us to generate the tags that can go into there, and you can start seeing results within that day. Like I said, as soon as that code is out there and deployed through a third-party ad server or site served, the data starts showing up in our interface within about 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay, thanks, guys. We do have another question. What are some best practices in terms of implementing a verification platform?
Okay, yeah, this is Ryan again. So I guess at a really high level, one of the best practices that we use at our agency is we use it as the default for all campaigns. And I think, as John went through the history of ad verification, a couple slides ago, one of the things that we've kind of handicapped ourselves with as an industry, I think, is to make it an option. So we're to the point where it's a default for all of our campaigns, and then if, for whatever reason, a client really doesn't care about where their ads are running, maybe we would turn it off. But the number one best practice is to just make it a default option and to pay whatever that really minimal CPM is that you would be paying, because it's clearly worth it, as we demonstrated from the importance of the numbers that we showed earlier.
Right, and I can add a little bit on the technical side on best practices, and it's really more about deployment. So I think, like I mentioned before, we make it as simple as possible. But there are a few things that a media team can use to really improve the quality of the data that we get back. And it has to do with things like which, if you're using something like DFA, which DFA tags are you deploying to your partners? Is it the iframe tags or is it the JavaScript tags? And so there's things that we can do that are very simple that just increases the quality of that output. The other things are, again, you want your networks and your DSPs and your direct publishers to be a partner in this and not an enemy. So we've also built a lot of features to allow inventory sources like that to get access to the data if the advertiser wants to give them access, so that they can address issues on their own without needing to go back to them. Or we also offer a pretty strong services organization that can help out with that as well.
That's great. Thank you. We have another question. This one's probably more geared for John. Does Adometry's ad verification technology work on mobile platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's going to be some limits. Mobile is a different kind of beast than a desktop, but you can still get a lot of contextual information. The way our viewability information works, it does take into account the actual size of the screen, because we're not using a crawler. We're actually using direct measurement. There is a lot that we can get from mobile. There's a few cases where it's a little bit limited in terms of mobile apps, but we get as much as we can and show that to our clients as well. We're also pretty open about what we can and can't collect. So we're not hiding anything. We're open about any match rates that we get. We believe that any relationship with an advertiser is definitely a partnership, and we want to be really open about how we get that and the quality of the data that we're getting, both on mobile and on normal devices.
Okay, thanks, John. Looks like a question for Ryan. What is the difference between ad viewability and view through? Sounds very technical.
Okay. So viewability, think about that as, when a user goes to a website, if they have the opportunity to see an ad. So maybe the ad is served at the top of the page, that was viewable, but if it fired when the page served and the user would have had to scroll down to see it, but they didn't scroll down, then that would be unviewable. So that's kind of the difference for viewability. And then view through is is more of a tracking mechanism to say that if an ad fired on a page as a consumer was looking at that page, and that consumer then left the page and went to the website and did the intended action anyway, then that's a view through. So viewability is kind of the opportunity to see, and view through is acting on that impression that they saw.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ryan.
Sure.
We have another question. Looks like our last question, maybe, unless someone else would like to write in. But how does ad blocking impact verification?
Yeah, so this in fact, it's addressed in the IAB's ad verification guidelines, which may be a little bit of a heavy read for folks, but it's worth it if you're really interested in the space. And if you look at that document, there was and it very clearly talks about ad blocking, and their recommendation officially from the IAB is to only use ad blocking in cases of known problems where you've not been able to resolve the problem with your publisher. And the reason they make that recommendation is because ad blocking, and sometimes I use this analogy, it's a little bit like the TSA, which is that it doesn't really add a whole lot to safety unless you have a big problem. It's not going to catch everything, and what it ends up doing is it contributes to things like discrepancies between ad server counting. It also adds substantially to latency of ad delivery, which the IAB has also done several studies on and found that even a slowdown of as much as 500 milliseconds can reduce response rates to advertisements by 15 to 20%. And so when you start to look at some of these negative aspects to ad blocking, it really, there isn't a big win for it. And again, you know, the IAB is pushing the ad blocking should be more of a source side implementation by a network or by, you know, a DSP, and doing it client side just is it has too many problems. It's not perfect because it doesn't catch everything. It may make you feel better, but it's really not effective and can cause more problems than good. So we've really focused our efforts on real-time reporting, partnering with your publisher so they can improve the quality of their data they're pushing out, and then really move towards, again, better campaigns.
Great. Thanks, John. Well, if we have no further questions, we'll go ahead and conclude our webinar. If any of you have follow-up questions, feel free to contact Ryan or John. We've got their contact information here for you on the current slide. So again, thank you for attending our joint webinar with Empower Media Marketing and Adometry, and we will be sending out a recording of today's presentation. So thank you all for attending, and we'll say goodbye. Thanks.